first I'll introduce the topic. The legend has it that Moses led the Jews from Egypt, who were being tortured there, and when they were wandering, they came across Mount Sinai. And while at the bottom of Mount Sinai, Moses saw a lot of lightning and dark clouds. And on an intuition, he went up to the top, and the legend has it that he met God. God spoke to Moses and wrote 10 commandments with his own handwriting and 2 slates. And he directed Moses that he should take the commandments to the people so that they will follow and lead a good and just life. So this, of course, is very sacred for Jews and Christians. Similarly, people in all walks of life need to have commandments in their own profession and in their own lives. So for good and just way to lead a life as a surgeon, probably we also need some commandments. With the help from many people, especially from Dr. we made some commandments which we thought we'll discuss. I have great honor to introduce all the speakers, and as usual, I'll go by alphabetical order.
Bhaskaran,
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
can your audio be a little more clearer? Maybe you come to the near the mic or something like that.
Okay. Yeah. So I have great pleasure in welcoming Professor Amla Pavanathan. He is a well-known senior consultant vascular surgeon in Chennai. He was earlier HOD and director of Institute of Vascular Surgery at Madras Medical College.
The slide isn't moved. Slide has to move. It looks like Kamal. Yeah.
So Professor Amla Pavanathan is a senior consultant vascular surgeon in Chennai. He was formerly HOD and director of Institute of Vascular Surgery at Madras Medical College. He was more known in his role as a member secretary of Transplant Authority of Tamil Nadu, Transtran it was known as, and he brought in so much of changes in Transtran, which became the most popular, most effective organ transplant authority in the country. So much so other states sought his help, and eventually a regional organ tissue transplant organization was created, and he was in charge. He also in silicosis, and he was asked to be a commissioner to the Honorable Supreme Court of India to report about silicosis in the Union Territory of Puducherry. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Bhaskaran. Can you hear me? Am I audible to you?
Yeah, I can.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Sharma is well known. He needs no introduction to this audience. For those who might not know, who just tuned in, he is an eminent surgeon, dedicated teacher, and a LGS legend, along with Dr. Patta Radhakrishna. He is a senior consultant surgeon at Action Balaji Hospitals, New Delhi. He owns and is a lead surgeon of his own hospital named after his father, Dr. D.N. Sharma Hospital in Sonipat. His special interests, of course, are trauma surgery, lap surgery, urology, and teaching and teaching and teaching. Welcome, Professor Sharma.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
I have great pleasure in welcoming my old colleague, Major General retired Dr. P.K. Patnaik, Vishisht Seva Medal. He is currently the principal of KIMS and Director Medical School, KIT, that is Kalinga Institute of Industrial Technology, Bhubaneswar. It is one of those 10 private institutions which have been certified to be institutes of excellence. And I am very sure Dr. Patnaik has had a major role to play in that. He was in the Army Medical Corps. He was an eminent GI surgeon and administrator at senior position. For his excellent contribution to the organization, he was awarded the Vishisht Seva Medal by the President of India. He was instrumental in establishing liver transplantation in the armed forces, and I think his interest in transplantation came up following his visit to Hospital, Queen Elizabeth Hospital for liver surgery as a British Council Fellow. Welcome, sir. Good friend, Professor P.K. Mishra, is currently the Director and HOD Surgical Gastroenterology at Max Super Specialty Hospital, Patparganj and other places in New Delhi. Earlier, he was Director Professor at G.B. Pant Institute. He is also well known for his mastery in Hindi poetry. He has numerous publications, professional and otherwise. He also edited a huge 2-volume textbook of surgical gastroenterology. Welcome, Dr. Mishra.
Thank you, Dr. Bhaskaran.
Dr. Umesh Raj Somasundaram is an associate professor of surgery at Adi Parashakti Medical College, Melbourne, Ottur. His special interest areas are GI surgery, lap surgery, thyroid, and diabetic food. He is a member of the Medical Education Curriculum Committee of his university and is very active in LGS. Welcome, Dr. Umesh. Dr. Vimal Raj Valaidam is my colleague in Miyat Hospital. He is an HBB and liver transplant surgeon. He is a surgical gastroenterologist by training and degree. However, he moved on to liver transplantation and he has had his training at Seoul and in Vedanta. He also has special interest in laparoscopic HBB surgery, for which he went to Paris on a fellowship. Welcome, Dr. Vimal.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. Now to have the panel starting, I have written the commandment to the surgeons and the commandment which was originally given by God to Moses is below. So our first commandment for the surgeons would be, thou shalt have no false pretenses above thy true capability. Now Dr. Amol, may I ask you, as a practicing Christian, how would you rate this surgical commandment?
Oh, you are asking me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, first I am not a practicing Christian, but
Okay.
I was a born Christian.
Okay.
That's okay. But I think this is the first and most important commandment for any aspiring surgeon. You must not only know your strengths, you must know your weaknesses also. Even after 30 years in vascular surgery, I will honestly admit that thoracoabdominal aneurysms are extremely difficult for me. The results are very poor. So I give it to somebody else who has better results than me. So it requires lot of understanding to understand what we are and what we are capable of. This is very important because we should not indulge in bravado and end up in unnecessary mortalities. So any aspiring surgeon should, while aspiring to progress in surgeries, should also know the limitations and accept it. See, millions of people play football, but everybody cannot be Pele. It's the reality. Everybody cannot be Tendulkar. So millions play cricket. So we will have to understand where we stop, and that is very crucial. And therefore, I fully appreciate the first commandment.
Thank you, sir. Professor Sharma, would you think that having a coach or a mentor would help a person to know exactly at what level he can operate?
I think more than a mentor, I would say having a coach, because mentors may not move along with. There should be somebody in the form of a coach. He may visit somebody's OR to look at how he does, what he can, and the best coach is introspection when you are outside the institution. After every case, one should think, what wrong I have done, how better I can do it next time. It is the self-introspection, and having a coach can always help. He may be a true friend, he may not be a very senior person, but somebody who can on fair grounds advise the capabilities and the weaknesses. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Mishra, do you think, how can a person know his limitation and when should he call for help? Like Professor Sharma mentioned, that he can have a coach who can tell him. So if he gets into a situation where it is beyond his capability, what should be the mode to ask for help?
When we are there as a resident, we do have somebody looking our back, and he tells us that what we are doing right or wrong. After that, you have to judge it yourself. I have seen this being posted many places that you have a coach like thing, but I don't think surgery is like that, that somebody would keep on coaching you and what you are doing right. You can view your own videos. You can kind of see other videos and try and improve over there. That is all right. But the concept of coach, I do not subscribe to that much.
Okay. Thank you.
Bhaskaran, if I can add some spice to the question.
Yeah.
Now, what all the seniors say, what I understand is that if you're not capable of doing a particular operation, accept it and don't take it up. Suppose if I don't reveal myself, I'll admit the patient, but I'll call somebody else to do. Is that acceptable? What is the comment of the first three seniors in this area?
Okay.
Because that happens quite often.
Yeah, I think it is quite acceptable as long as the patient also knows that you have called someone who is better capable of doing that particular type of surgery and the patient is in safe hands. Ultimately, it's the patient's safety and confidence in you, in your setup, and in your surgical team that matters.
And my guru, Professor GDS.
What would be your opinion?
I think this is a very good way to upgrade oneself. Suppose you call somebody for 10-15 times, I think 16th time one person will start doing himself. So this is calling somebody is like calling Ved Vyas. The things work out well and the things remain within the same unit also.
Okay. Is General Patnaik around? Hello.
Mishra sir.
Sir, say
Can I add a sentence?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, General Patnaik.
Yes.
Did you hear the question?
The first commandment, na?
Yeah.
I want to add just a sentence
Yeah.
that if it takes 5 years to know how to operate, it takes 15 years to master when to operate. And it takes lifetime to learn when not to operate.
Okay. No, there was also a question, other ways, that if you cannot operate a particular patient and you get somebody else to come and operate, is it acceptable?
Yeah, that is what the surgeon must know his limitations first. And there is nothing wrong in calling somebody and assisting him when he operates a procedure which you are not a master.
I'll add just one thing, that you should also admit it that somebody is being called and give due credit to him. It
Yes.
is not right that you admit a patient under you, get somebody to operate, and then you take the credit for it. So
And you should keep the patient informed.
you should keep the patient informed. You should tell that so and so person would be coming and give him due credit for that.
Go back here.
Part of this problem in surgical gastroenterology, because we are called many times to assist in say surgeon by a surgeon. So I would think that it is only ethical and moral that if you are calling somebody, you give due credit to him and let the patient know that so and so is going to operate on you.
Oscar, can I add a word?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, it frequently happens with our dental colleagues. Recently, I went for a dental procedure. My dentist said there is somebody who is better in doing this particular kind of procedure. I will call him, but you can have it in my clinic itself. So that particular person came and did it for me. And I believe that happens routinely in dental procedures.
That's true. It also happens in many corporate hospitals where there is a team. So it happens, I think, in smaller nursing homes also. So now let's move on to the second commandment. Honor thy patient and their professional team. So obviously this is a very important aspect. Professor Sharma, what would you like to say on this? Because it's about building a team. How recognizing the contribution by your team.
I actually over recognize the confidence of my number 2 and number 3 in my unit. And that I was taught by my mentor, Dr. Eggleston. And in front, not only I encourage them in OR, also in front of the VIPs and the sick patient getting well, I always say that you have got well because of all of us. And I also praise that Dr. Arindam one day would be much better surgeon than what I am today. Number one, it has many issues. Number one, it encourages the team to work better. Number two, the patient gets more confidence in my team. Number three, the patients do not disturb me very often when they know his number 2 is also very good.
So that's a secret you are letting out.
No, yes, I'm here to tell everything.
Vimal, are you around?
Yes, sir. I'm
Yeah. What would you say? How to honor your patient and how do you encourage a team? Team is not only your doctors, your other people also.
Yes, sir. It's very important to give due credit to everybody in your team. You know, it's not a one-man job. You know, we have an experienced panel. We have an experienced faculty around. I feel everybody in the team are equal and they do equal job. So when the patient walks in, it's better to introduce your colleagues and you should tell them these are the people who are taking care of you throughout your course. And if you don't do it, and there will be always one will be number one and others are your assistants, and they don't believe you. You say some important things. For example, if you're going to disclose some complication and want to operate on that, they would say like, I would like to have a chief's opinion or your boss opinion. You ask me. Things like that can happen. It's happened to us many times when we grow. So it is very important to let the patient know the whole team and to introduce them and give them new credit, especially when you have a successful outcome.
So the mindset will have to change from me to we.
Yes, sir. It has changed. I think it's not like, I don't know, the previous generation was different, but the present generation and in the future also, it's already been a big.
Thank you. Umesh, you are in a medical college as a unit. So what is your view on honoring the patient and the professional team?
Thank you, sir. Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, we can.
Yes, sir. Actually, being in a
Your
medical
camera
college.
is not on, Umesh.
Yes, sir. I will tell you, sir. Can you see me, sir?
Yes.
Sir, being in a medical college, we are in sets of units. So definitely the team is the most important factor, sir. Most of the times when we are going to operate as duty surgeons or the next team has to take up the patient has to be introduced to the team, sir. So the unit, me being a unit chief, I try to engage my team members, SRs and assistants into the patient's care. So when we are in weekend ends, we cannot see the patient, then they have to take care of the patient, sir. So patients like to try to see only the surgeon's face, but as working as a team, definitely the patient has to see everyone, writing from the junior resident to the house surgeon and to the SRs. So the teamwork is, we cannot exclude teamwork in a medical college, sir, being in a medical college.
Okay. And how about
Bhaskaran, if I can add on.
Yes, Radha.
See, in the corporate sector, most of the patients come for a particular person, the chief. And effectively, the communication will be with the chief. And many a times, the chief will use the number 2, 3, 4 as only a, working people. They are not involved in decision making, or he'll try to portray that he's the ultimate authority and all others will work for him. How can this be made better, or how this can be avoided? That question, maybe Professor GDS can start on.
Yeah.
I think all those chiefs which do not give recognition, respect, and share responsibilities, they have a rapid turnover of their team. And they never
Very
grow.
true.
Somebody who wants to grow far off has to grow with the crowd. Take everybody along with. Yesterday, very interesting, how to encourage people. Yesterday, one of the VIPs who got well, they brought a very expensive wristwatch and a perfume for me. I called my number 2. I said, in this bag, there's a wristwatch and a perfume. Which one would you like to take? So I gave him the first choice. At my phase of life, either of them do not carry any value. It is the boys being encouraged. I mean, if he has taken a watch of 6,000 rupees, it's a big thing for him that I take care of him, not 6,000 rupees. So we need to encourage people. And if elderly, imagine if our teachers also could not encourage us, how we would have grown to this level. So it is our phase of life to give back to our friends, juniors, and to the society, not to take. Thank you.
Radha,
So very true, sir.
as your LGS motto stands, help others rise.
Yes.
So all of us will have to do that.
It's not my motto, Bhaskar, it's our motto.
LGS, I said LGS motto.
It is our motto.
I said LGS motto
Okay.
is help others rise, and
Right.
that means all of us will have to contribute.
Yes.
By making everybody go up, we don't necessarily go down. But that is a mindset in the olden days. I think things are changing. It's a very good thing. I want to ask people about how do you honor the patient, which is very important in the sense, what is the confidentiality you have, and sorry, and how do you not make false claims? You got to be truthful. Yeah, that is Patnaik, sir. Are you?
See, I just wanted to add that like any other game, organized game, surgery is a teamwork. You may be the leader. I remember Dr. Ramdas, General Ramdas telling me, the Argentina football team can have 11 Maradonas, but to make them work together to fire a goal is important. That is the job of the captain or the leader.
Yes.
In this contest, if you have heard the small clippings of our late President Abdul Kalam, when he first time failed in the missile, his boss went and faced the press. Next time when the missile got lodged in this space, he told Abdul Kalam to go and give the press meeting. That is what the leader should be. The team leader, when you are a surgeon and you are leading the team, the success you should distribute to your team. The failure you must face it from the front. That should be the criteria of a senior most surgeon or a team leader.
Okay.
Well
So you
said,
Very,
sir.
very well said, sir.
Team.
Well said.
Yes, Dr. Bhaskaran.
Yeah.
I was listening to Dr. Sharma. I just want to ask him if there is any vacancy in his team.
Everyone will go there.
Okay. Now,
Very famous lines that if you have to go fast, you go alone. And if you have to
now we come to one of the most important commandments, that is, surgeon should remember learning is forever, and you should keep learning wholly by sharing thy wisdom. Okay. Now let's start with Dr. Vimal.
Sir. You all know, things have changed from open surgery to laparoscopic and robotic. So, if you don't keep learning these things, you get back in your practice. People don't come to you to get trained. And it is like for example, if you finish general surgery and when you come out, you're not complete. There are many things that you need to acquire that include many special skill sets. For example, laparoscopy, you need to do endoscopies, some vascular surgery. You need to learn in every stage of your career. I have learned from my colleagues, my postgraduates. I have learned from my assistants. I learned a lot from Bari, and I'm learning a lot from Kapil. Still, the learning phase goes on and on. Even when you become old, I know the senior professors would agree. There's something you learn new every day when you operate.
So I remember from the time I finished my medicine and now I am here, whatever I learned, I am not practicing, and whatever I am practicing, I never learned those days. Laparoscopy surgery are not existing at all. So we need to learn, unlearn, update, and upgrade. So this is a thing. If you don't grow and change, you will like the dinosaurs. Okay, let's ask the youngest in this group, Dr. Umesh.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, what would you say about this? For young people who are watching you, what would you like to say?
Yes, sir. Sir, thank you, sir. Actually, can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, we can.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Sir, when we started as an MS General Surgery, sir, we came out with general surgical skills. But when after entering the college only, medical college as a senior resident and then assistant professor, then only I've been taught, we learned lab. from our seniors. So when we started as a career, laparoscopy was still in infancy in the college which I have finished. So when people are studying as PGs, postgraduates, they should be given enough exposure of laparoscopy. But the younger generation needs to learn more about other conditions too, like managing a diabetic foot. People like younger generations are more interested and inclined towards laparoscopy and doing clean surgeries rather than handling diabetic foot, ulcers, infections, anything else. And I like to stress the younger generation that these cases are to be needed taken care of. As many seniors are here, laparoscopy is very good, but moreover, as general surgeons, they have to learn more about all these common conditions which are neglected and patients land up in amputations. As Amlo sir also knows very well, many people are still unaware of what's happening to these cases. So I like to stress the younger generation to learn about all these conditions which are very important too.
Thank you. Professor Amol sir.
No,
How do you upgrade your knowledge and skills over a period of time?
I would like to quote one of those old Arthur Haley's book, Final Diagnosis.
Yes.
The book ends like this. In the last, the pathologist will tell his resident,
Yeah.
you must learn every day, even if it means locking yourself in toilet to read. Do that. So it is the advice that Arthur Haley, a pathologist, gives to his residents. And I think that is very true even today. We must learn every day if we want to be teachers. A teacher should be a very good student first.
Bhaskaran, if I can add once again.
Yeah.
Sorry?
See, there are situations seen through my career that many a times the assistant knows more than the chief.
Exactly.
Many a times that is not encouraged if the assistants try to speak more. Many a times an assistant is not allowed to do something which the boss cannot do. Amal, your comment.
Attitude exists in this country, unfortunately. But I think it's a question of time when people come to know what is the real situation. And
I want all others to comment on that.
Market forces will change them. Yes, we'll ask. Yeah, Dr. Pramod Mishra.
As far as learning is concerned, it has to go on. And you learn the most when you teach others. This is the time when you kind of analyze your thoughts, analyze your kind of what you have been doing. And when you kind of teach somebody, then that is the most important time that your learning occurs. It is like, say, before going to exam, we read the most, right? And we keep on learning right from the beginning itself. As in turn, we learn from senior sisters, then we kind of, as we learn from the books, from our teachers. When I joined from, say, the government sector to the corporate sector, I didn't know anything about it. I learned from my junior colleagues, from my coordinators and other people, how the things are done over there, how the insurance is there, how billing is done, and what kind of things are there. So every step of life, you would keep on learning, and you should never leave that. And only if you keep on learning, only then you'll keep on growing. Otherwise, static water gathers moss.
Absolutely true, sir. I agree with you 100%.
Dr. Amol, you have worked in government sector. How do you address the problem which is faced by a lot of people, which Dr. Radha mentioned? You are number two, you are more competent than your seniors, but you are not permitted to do anything.
These things come out of pettiness that exists in every field. But a very wise team leader will know that the whole prestige of the team goes up if he encourages younger people who are more talented than perhaps the leader. The success of the team lies in the success of the team members. What one can do individually, a collective team achieves much better. If the team leader knows that, he will encourage young people to develop. See, we used to have regular teaching classes in our vascular surgery department. Every day I tell my students, for me, because you are presenting, I am learning. Otherwise, I have no time to read all these things, and I may not understand all these things as well as you do. Therefore, I considered all my MCH postgraduates as my teachers. That was the attitude I had, and I continue to have.
From JDS,
Radha's question
Yes.
was
I will speak something very blunt truth as usual. You see, this real encouraging your younger guy comes in today's scenario only in the colleges where the younger resident or fellow has become a consultant. He has more respect for his teacher who has taught him, and the teacher also has an attachment. In the current corporate culture, the general manager wants to have a competition between number 2 and 3. They will count every month how many cases number 2 brought from his clinic, how many cases, Professor Mishra will agree with me, how many cases number 3 brought every month. So the next year's salary will be based on how have you performed this year in bringing your patient from outside. So then when there is financial conflict involved, the teacher and trainee relationship cannot last. And that's what happens in corporate system.
There is an issue raised by Atul Gawande many years ago that surgeons who are planning to improve their knowledge, skills especially, should have a coach. Like all other fields, athletes, basketball players, they all have coaches. A surgeon should also have a coach. So what would you say about it? I remember somebody mentioned about it. Vimal, would you like to comment on this?
Yes, sir.
A coach stands behind you and keeps telling you your right hand movement is little not very good. If you can do this, it will
Bhaskaran, what is the question?
The question is to improve performance, athletes engage coaches.
Yes.
Why not surgeons also have coaches? Atul Gawande raised this issue earlier. Yeah.
Yes.
I am a beneficiary of this coaching. Sometimes when you do some procedures like lab call, you've been doing it for years. You don't know the same mistake you've been committing. You really don't know why it bleeds every time you do it. And once my chief was standing behind me, I didn't know he was there. But he told me, you're trying to turn your, clamp or whatever, you're doing it often. That's injuring the small branches of the artery. That's the reason why you're doing it. And after that, I completely changed. It changes. And it's very important to have somebody. For example, sometimes when I'm operating or when Ilango is operating, one of us will watch. And it's much easier, it becomes easier next time because he would say, like, you're doing this often. Maybe you need to do it side. Because these are small steps, especially when you're doing back for a longer period.
If I can, Atul Gawande says, that you call a senior surgeon to watch you operating and silently. Because you are committing a error you don't realize. If a senior surgeon takes a ringside view while you are operating, he will point out 1 or 2 or 3 things where your procedure will improve and your complication rate will decrease. That is a good suggestion, and that is not a bad idea.
Yeah, I think maybe we should have a group of people senior enough to have experience and guide people. So
No, but they can be silent observers while you run your normal OT, and then they point out, if you do like this, that will be better.
yeah, so that is one option people can have.
Yeah.
Another thing probably is mentorship, which will help in improving skills, knowledge, and as a team, personal relationship. Yeah.
Where, Bhaskar, can I?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, where possible, it is good to have a mentor or your guru standing behind you to advise you, guide you, hold your hands, etc. But most of our younger surgeons operate alone. They are in rural areas, small nursing homes, and it's very difficult for a mentor. So what I would suggest is, one, discuss every one of your failures or complications with your mentors over phone later, after the surgery perhaps, and discuss what went wrong and correct yourselves. Secondly, today in a lot of good videos are available in YouTube. We can see the experts doing the same surgery. We can watch several people doing the same procedures, and probably we can try to correct ourselves. This is for people who don't have ready access for mentors.
They can also discuss upfront.
Exactly.
And ask for advice, opinion, view.
Exactly.
There are many roads to Rome. Which road to take?
Exactly.
Bhaskaran, after you attain certain age and seniority, It is not possible to have your mentor all the time around you. Okay.
Yeah.
You don't need a mentor at that stage all the time. But you can
Yes.
ask his opinion.
So the idea is you invite an independent senior surgeon just to spend 1 or 2 days with your OT and suggest we do like this. If you do like this, that is better. This probably is more helpful than having the mentor all the round breathing down your neck.
True. Okay. Let's move on to the next one.
Dr. Bhaskaran, can I say one thing?
Yeah.
Although a very celebrated surgeon, he is a author of many books, he has given this idea, but this seems to be a very impractical kind of an idea. I do not agree with it at all. And you cannot have a very senior surgeon watching you that what you are doing wrong and then trying to correct it. It's not like a coach-like situation that, say, Agassi is coaching somebody like that. You know, he's the same kind of person, stature and same kind of skills, and he's coaching some another person. It's not like that. It is very impractical, and I don't think what you can do is, if you do not know about certain surgery or you're not doing it that well, you should go and watch somebody who is senior or who is doing it better and correct yourself.
No, but still you do not know. I think having a good idea. Senior person, let him come and watch and tell. These are the refinements you can do.
DDS sir, what is your comment on this particular aspect?
I would refloat my concept of having a surgical uncle for everybody. When I say surgical uncle, that means somebody who knows more than me. So whenever I am in problem in OR, even at this age, I have a good GI surgeon who is my friend. I call him my uncle. I have a good plastic surgeon who is my friend. You know, you can call them up, and when you're in problem, you can get a right kind of opinion on phone. But you have to maintain this relationship lifelong. It cannot happen suddenly you call up your boss. This is happening in today's world. The postgraduates, once they pass out, they absolutely disconnect with their professor. Then suddenly they will ring up and, sir, I was your PG in 2011. Now, which sir is going to resemble? Remember that. So if you want to maintain the legend of getting a help once in a while in theater, remember your boss's birthday and anniversaries to wish him. Only then he will pick up your phone.
Okay.
In addition, GDS sir, maybe you can call your boss once in a while to observe what you're doing in
Yes,
a very
why not?
friendly manner, and offer him samosa and tea, and maybe can ask for suggestions. Like, he's the right person because he's not going to criticize you badly.
Let me share with you a very important past. Dr. Eggleston, every year he used to go to America for 3 weeks, and 1 week he used to spend with one of his old residents for the same purpose.
Excellent. Now we know as professionals, we concentrate more on our career, work hard, look after patients, but neglect self and family. I remember Dr. Sharma telling earlier once, we are all wage earners on a daily basis. If you are not well, your business is done till you become all right. So we need to work on this commandment, thou shalt not make unto neglect of self and family. Okay, shall I ask Vimal, how do you try to find balance between work and family?
I feel this is the most important thing one should consider, especially considering this.
Well, can you be louder? We can't hear you well.
Especially when you're considering the current stress involved in the corporate setup and not from the corporate setup. You should know how to take care of yourself and also your family. It's very important to have this as a part of your daily game you play. It has to be there. Daily you need to take care of yourself and also your family. For example, I've known senior surgeons like Professor Parnavelu, Professor Rela, who spend considerable amount of time exercising daily, on a daily basis. Some people go for a swim, some people do yoga in the morning at 4. They get up in the morning, they do yoga, they take care of themselves, then they come to the OR to operate. These are the things that they've been doing this for like 15 years, 20 years, which have made them, age gracefully. to stand for long operations and to operate at beyond certain age. So some people are even operating at 70, some are operating at 75. Their hands don't shake. They stand for a long time. So it is the most important thing the surgeons should learn, because it is not like medicine. Surgery is an art that you need to practice throughout your life until you really age. So you need to practice it well. So you need to age very gracefully and very strong. So this is the most important thing I would like to say. And the next thing is,
You are a marathon runner. How about people like me?
no sir, I think walking is enough. Marathon is because like we think like, especially when I wanted to do transplant, they said, "Leo, you need to stand for 12 hours, 14 hours, you can't do it." So I thought like taking up marathon as, as a passion would help me stand for long hours. So I used to run long, like 5 hours, 4 hours. Then that made me like, stand for 2 days without a problem. That's not a thing. But that is not necessary. The most important thing is if you take 40 minutes walk in the night, maybe a brisk walk, that would take every worry off your head. And you would feel fresh and you would get the newest, most difficult question you are not able to answer the whole day would come to your mind. It's the most important thing I would say for every surgeon. I think seniors would agree. Everybody has some form of, hobby or some kind of like walking, running, even cycling. Most of the senior surgeons do some kind of,
Fitness regime.
you keep fit. I know you. You keep walking all the time.
Bhaskaran, if I can ask the faculty, do they have any protocol that we'll have one meal with the family, a dinner or a breakfast or anything of that nature? Because where is the connect? Quite often, especially if Dr. Pramod Mishra is there, he'll go home late because of he's earning money, so he'll go home and everybody's asleep. Or Professor GD has been working very hard for so many years. How did he? How all did you keep that connect on? Do you have any protocol?
Yeah. Dr. Sharma sir, how you fix a Sunday lunch with family, everyday dinner with family? How is it working?
Well, we had always dinner on table every day since my beginning of career, and then every Sunday we go out for a dinner, and regardless of good, bad or ugly, I watch the Sunday afternoon movie with my wife. Whatever be it is more an outing or a reason to go out than actually watching the movie. And then more than that, use your sweet words. Even when you have come home late, you can have some nice dialogues, willfully or unwillfully, both ways. You may be dead tired from whole day surgery, but when you walk home, you should be smiling. Nobody wants to receive a, half dead man, because this is our everyday schedule. So one should be pleasant on lip service. So all this has worked well.
What is your advice to youngsters that, regarding their daily schedule of a lunch or dinner or whatever?
Well, if you remember, I had a full lecture on this, how to pamper your wife.
Okay, Dr. Amol, what is your schedule? Do you spend time with family, a planned manner?
No, actually, this is a very complex question. This is not a very easy question. You see, for a young surgeon, one is this constant urge to prove himself to others that he is a good surgeon. So they take up lot of cases, work for long hours just to prove to themselves and to others that they are good surgeons. This comes probably out of insecurity or probably out of that urge to prove yourself. So they neglect their families and operate from morning to night, midnight, then again from next day early morning. I have seen especially this with the transplant surgeons very closely. Second thing is the corporate culture. The more you operate, the more you pamper you. They were not worried about your family or your peace of mind, etc. So if you want to climb up the corporate ladder, you sacrifice so many things. Third, it's also the country. Country like America, if you want to be a successful transplant surgeon, you must be mad. You must really be mad. You must be doing enormous numbers which others cannot match. Then only you are considered a successful surgeon. So people sacrifice their family life and self for the sake of all these material things, and that is why you see suicides are very common in countries like America. Suicides by surgeons and doctors. So actually, this is a very complex question, and surgeons from the very beginning they must know that family is much more important than material gains in the long run. So I think this must be a part of teaching very early in the
Kamal,
career.
what is your schedule with your family?
My night dinner, always.
Okay.
Always.
Well, it is not necessarily for money. Like there are many complex. I remember I didn't spend enough time with my children. I remember one day my daughter told me, "Dad, you won't see us, you won't talk to us unless we come to you as a patient." That hit me.
Yeah.
I'll ask others, General Patnaik, what would you say? How do you advise people to allocate time?
Dr. Bhaskaran, to put you in a lighter vein, come to medical college, you will have a khushi life. There are a group of people to work for you. You keep on giving sermons and come in time, go in time, and spend time with the family, but earn as per your need, not as per your greed.
Yes.
Number two, if you work in corporate, especially in your climbing days, the MBAs are breathing down your neck. The management is giving you target. There is a peer competition, and once you get into that race, there is no end to it. And you have missed the bus for a medical college or a teaching career. So it depends upon your personality. What kind of a personality you want, that you choose your life's path. If you want a mixture of clinical, teaching, research, publication, choose both cultures cannot be mixed. You see, the medical culture, college culture is different, corporate culture is different. And we have made it so. So you have to choose in between, and taking out time is your choice. Okay, nobody can tell you or nobody can force you. It depends upon your mentality and your lookout to the life, and how completeness you have in want to have in life. That is important. My way is the youngsters, don't get into the greed. Money will follow you. Money will follow you. Just live as per the need, and money will follow you. I have seen people, retired professors, they stand, write prescription, money. They consult, money. Even once you are at one place and do worth your salt, the money just comes like that, not for pauses like us, because we don't have a clientele base. Otherwise, those who are college professors at one place, they just walk with money and talk with money.
Okay. Umesh, how do you find time to spend with your family?
Is Umesh married?
Yeah, I think
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm married, sir.
Happily married.
And,
I presume.
Even girlfriend can be taken
Yes,
into
sir.
it.
Happily married with the kids, sir.
Okay. No, that doesn't.
Happily married with the kid as
I want to ask you, are you spending quality time with the child? Because
Yes, sir.
Mr. GD has once mentioned, time is the best gift you can give to your children.
Yes, sir. Definitely, I'm as a
Yeah.
yes, sir. As exactly as Sarah has told, in medical colleges we find adequate time, sir. Being in now only got started a post graduation course. Till now we have been having undergraduates. We get a lot of time in medical colleges, and we wind up soon, sir. But except for the duty days and backing up our senior residents, we get a lot of quality time. Apart from our clinics, we get a quality time, sir.
Okay.
So, how we are spending with our families, we get to go away, go out in weekends, and have dinners and everything, sir. And to one thing I have to tell is to everyone is, are we getting enough sleep, sir? As so many seniors are there, and how they were started in their career, and right from start of their career, how was their sleep, quality of sleep, sir? They have been sleeping well now, not before.
Bhaskaran, with your permission, I'll ask Ilango to come in and answer this question. If he's there, Ilango?
Sir, I am very much there.
Switch the lights on. And how do you spend time with your family? And what about your
If he
sleep?
spends, first whether he's spending.
Yeah,
Sorry, Mr.
yeah, Ilago.
Morning he was having breakfast with her.
That's the proof. I mean, yeah, nice to see Hema.
Yeah. Hi,
Hema
Hema.
should say whether he spends enough time at home.
Ilango, the wives probably understand or accept husbands better, but the children don't. So how do you spend quality time with children?
That's a difficult question. I think
Little louder, Ilago.
till they were like in 8th standard.
Bhaskaran,
Yeah.
one interrupt. That ask the panel of surgeons how many seeing them, how many of their children want to become surgeons?
None, probably. Anyway, I'll ask.
Ask.
Yeah, Ilago.
The one was about 8th standard. We moved to the US. So we never asked them what they liked at that point of time. But that was the time I really missed. I used to leave at 6 a.m. in the morning, and I will be back by around 8 p.m. Sometimes they may not see me. So days together, I was not seeing them. And on Sundays, I used to go in scrubs to the church and probably sleep there in the last bench. That was a very, very bad time for all of us. But things actually worked. Once my elder son was talking to me, especially, you do what you like. That's the most key thing. And I think they looked at both of us during the second year of our fellowship. They used to cook for us. And even now, during the lockdown, we are not there most of the time. Our children probably have grown up and they're taking care of us now. But if we had little children, I'm sure it would have been very, very difficult. That is one of the breaking points for transplant surgery. I had grown-up children at that time, so I could risk it. But people with young families, they really struggle during the transplant fellowship. When it lasts a long time, multiple days missing families, it's very, very difficult to manage. I should consider myself lucky, but it has taken a long time. We have finished 24 years of marriage now. Yeah, it's a long time. I mean, I think you should give adequate time for the river to flow. Then it keeps going. I don't still feel that settle down. We still have to meet and spend a lot of time with family to have a good profession. And to answer Dr. Patnaik's question, my children decided not to do medicine after looking at us.
Thank you. Dr. Mishra, I want you to give one final answer on this topic.
Oh.
A surgeon should take care of his family and self for a time when he is not able to earn or after his retirement.
So firstly, let me thank Dr. Radhakrishnan for spreading good rumors about me. Secondly, in the government sector, there's some problem regarding, say, your thing, because as a doctor, as a surgeon, you will certainly have irregular timings and there will be problems. So within this framework, we have to see, we cannot also afford to neglect our patients, do our duties. Within that framework, in the government sector, it is not very difficult to manage your time and have some time for your family and children. But in corporate sector, this is a little bit of a problem, because not only the duties are more, they are odd hours, patients are more demanding. So over there, what you can do is you can build up a team. And you should not have that much amount of greed. You should ask for less. You should not ask for a huge amount of money. Then you will be always under pressure to deliver that much. So this is one of the ways where how you can manage that. You should have some spare time. You should work in a team, and then you can balance your life. It is like a wheel, and if all the spokes are not equal, the wheel would not run smoothly. If your professional part of the professional spoke is very big and rest of them are smaller, then the wheel would go a little odd. So if you reach the pinnacle of your, say, profession, and there is no a relation or no family to clap for you, then I think that is not what we are pursuing. We are pursuing happiness in life, and accordingly, you should balance your life in such a way that you take care of the family, your children, as much as you take care of your profession. This is a very good point that Bhaskaran you have put in over here, that we should not neglect ourselves, because say suppose you don't have good health, then you cannot last very long in your profession. So you have to take care of your health as well as of family also.
Thank you. I'll ask Dr. Sharma one last sentence on this before we move on to the next one. That is, should we plan for our retirement or for a rainy day when we are not in a position to work? Professor GDS, sir, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Jana nahi.
Yeah. I think I planned my retirement when I was 40 years old. And we must earn but spend wisely. So by the age of 55, I generated enough corpus that if I don't work at all, I can sit cross legs on a chair and have a reasonable quality of life. We should save money for the rainy day. Remember, your kids, family, everybody around cares more when you have some reservoir than otherwise. Then you have not to beg, because whenever you go to them, you have something to give. You have not something to take, right? It may be a small token gift. So we should keep fit. We should plan to work till 70 years of age, but we should be mentally prepared that if at 60 I have to call quits for some reasons, because even if you are physically fit, malignancy cannot be assured that it will not affect somebody. So financial wisdom, and one must learn financial wisdom so that your money starts earning and working for you.
Thank you. Excellent idea. So let's move on to the next one, which is the fifth one. Thou shalt not take the name of science in vain. Let's ask Professor Amol.
Yes. This again very true, because many times we are not just guided by science. We are also guided by industry, especially pharmaceutical industry, especially instruments industry, gadgets industry, etc., where we compromise science for monetary returns. I think it's very, very important that we always stick to science. I can see in vascular surgery that several good surgeries were replaced by gadget-oriented surgeries whose outcome is not very good. The favorite phrase they use is non-inferior, something like that. But I think because of the thrust by industry, especially instruments industry, gadgets industry, catheter industry, etc., many good procedures were given away and these things were adopted. So I think all of us at all times should have science as the first and foremost guiding spirit in your practice.
Thank you. I remember, many of us may have seen that there are some surgeons who do enormous number of lap fundoplications on diagnosis of DRD, telling the patient that he or she will develop cancer if not operated immediately. Can I ask Dr. Vimal to give his opinion as to how science is misused?
You know well, yeah, all our practicing surgeons, we know well that the patient comes to us for a guidance and treatment. You can he believes you, that's why he comes to you. You can tell him that there is a chance that this, whatever may be the condition, for example, a gallstone that can turn into a gallbladder cancer in 10 years, 15 years, it's better to remove. For example, polyps, the TB polyps. There is science that tells us when it becomes more than 1 centimeter, there is a chance of cancer. But when it's small, it can be observed. But it is up to the surgeon to interpret science correctly and to tell them. They don't know, patient doesn't know. They may have some Google knowledge, but still they don't know. It is for us to tell exactly what is being said and what is the interpretation and what is the benefit of removing the gallbladder in a GB polyp. I think you're meaning that. I think whatever your meaning is like.
Yeah, it's all about conscience, Vimal. Conscience. I mean, what he's trying to say is, for it, when as my mentors used to say, that treat every patient as your brother, sister, keep in that position and decide that what is required and not required. I mean, that's what it comes to eventually.
Yeah. Dr. Patnaik, what would you like to say on this?
You see, when you use science for your benefit at the cost of a patient, then you no more remain a doctor. Number one. And number two, that because somebody else will do if I don't do, that is not the excuse. Somebody says, if I don't remove a asymptomatic unindicated gallbladder, somebody else will remove it in the street next door, is amounting that if a girl is walking in the night, if I don't rape, somebody else will rape her. Okay, so I don't consume that diet. And if you use science for your gain at the cost of a patient, you no more remain as a doctor.
Thank you. A very valid point. Dr. Sharma sir, what is your view on this commandment?
Agreed fully with others, but I would like to tell young this.
Sir, we can't hear you.
Only to make some more money, give us what most people will give such a wrong opinion to make some more money. But what I tell youngsters, that you can more give that opinion, because your opinion will be challenged nowhere.
Bhaskar.
Yeah.
Am I clear?
Yes. So we couldn't hear you half the time. So can you come back again? I couldn't hear. I don't know about others.
Bhaskaran,
Yeah.
do you, if I can ask you, you're a moderator, do you take your associate's opinion seriously? If he disagrees with you that a particular procedure is not required, will you give it some importance?
I do. Of course. Most of the times they decide.
No,
Yeah.
because it's also possible that I made a decision to operate. That's all. I may not reason out with my assistants. They may think that okay, the staff is doing something which is not right.
True. So best is I ask the patient to be seen by these people, and I ask them, should we operate or not? So the decision to operate, for example, an appendicitis patient comes. I personally do not operate majority of them. 90% of them I treat. So I leave it to my residents. You assess, you tell whether the patient needs surgery or not. So then if I overrule, I give them the answer. Why? If you want, like Professor Sharma said, if you want the team to stay with you, then you got to value their knowledge, value their contribution. If you don't, like you have felt many times in your past, you move out. So you don't stay.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Now let's move on to the next commandment.
Sir. Hello.
Yeah.
Hello, sir.
Yeah,
Yes,
Umesh.
Sir, I have one interruption, sir. Science varies from place to place and countries to countries, sir. Do you agree with that, sir? Because in being in a developing country like India, sir, or
its utility may vary. Science cannot vary. Theory is the same everywhere.
Sir, regarding the guidelines produced by the Western people, is it be applicable to our country also, sir? Is it in every way?
Should
Are
be.
we managing?
Should be. I am sure other panelists also will give their opinion. A guideline given by Western countries should be applicable to us unless you tell our population is different. Our country characteristics are different. Our disease pattern is different, etc., etc.
No, sir, it is much more complex than this. Now, for example, let us take the example of drugs. I will tell about anticoagulants. For a long time, warfarin and acetylene are good enough drugs. but suddenly the market thrusts you the newer anticoagulants, which are extremely expensive, and whose benefit over the older conventional drugs is just marginal. Now, in a country like India, and in a say government hospital where poor people come in good numbers, what do? Do you go only for the nice indications or the US vascular surgeries surgeons recommendations, or you go by practicalities? Many times I have realized that excellence is often the enemy of good.
Excellent.
No, sir. Think global, act local.
Do we do that? That's the question. Many times we are in the laps of the industry and the drug companies and the manufacturers. Our conferences depend on that. Our medical education depend on that. Therefore, unconsciously, our thinking, our working, our prescription style, our surgeries, everything slowly moves in that direction. I have found that. Varicose vein could have been simply stripped. Suddenly you get laser, suddenly you get radio frequency. They have some benefits, but their benefits are marginal. But the whole spectrum is changed because of the thrust, relentless thrust by industry, and not very much by science.
Yeah, but I think by and large the guidelines for us we let to make. If our own associations do not make guidelines, then we are at a loss. Umesh's question is right. So it's a responsibility of our associations to make suitable guidelines for our country.
Yes, sir. Actually, most of the time we struggle with guidelines, sir. That's what the issues is. The European guidelines, Western guidelines, US guidelines, nice. Everything differs and our patients present late to us. For example, in case of breast cancer also, we tend to have patients with late presentations, which is very quite uncommon in a Western setup. But they are the people who frame guidelines for locally advanced breast cancer. It's quite uncommon in their setup and their places. So that's why I beg to disagree with Western guidelines in toto, sir.
Dr. Pari, are you there? You want to make a comment here?
Sir, I just joined, sir. So I'll be observer for now.
Yeah.
And then I will chip in if I have anything, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Radha, I'll move to the next commandment.
Yes, sure.
This is a very important one. So, thou shalt not kill or harm any patient. This is a modification of the original commandment, thou shalt not kill. Now, let's ask Dr. Mishra. This is a very tricky situation. You may sit quiet on a patient who is very ill because of hypovolemic shock, and you think you are going to die and you are not going to operate, he will definitely die. So, this is one issue. Another issue is, you have a patient who has got terminal malignancy and you want to go and operate, he will die. So how do we adjust this? Dr. Mishra.
What I believe is that principles of biomedical ethics are there. This is beneficence, non-maleficence, that is primum non nocere, that is above all do no harm. Then you have autonomy and justice, right? So these are the principles by which we go in biomedical ethics. So, in a situation where, say, suppose there is a splenic injury, patient is bleeding, almost pulseless, there you would want to go in even if you have to give 1% chance. But if you know that this patient is not going to benefit from any operation, a terminal malignancy, why would you want to operate except if it is for palliative nature, patient is in obstruction or something. So I believe that operating should be a conscious act. It should be a conscious act. It should be based on the evidence that we have. It is not a matter of courage, or it should be well seasoned with prudence. So this kind of situation, every situation would be different, and it is absolutely right that you do not want to harm the patient by your intervention. So this has been an agreed principle right from the beginning, that above all we will not do anything to harm the patient. When we know in advance that our surgery is not going to benefit the patient, why should we operate? We should not be operating such a patient say terminal malignancy, metastatic disease, except if you think that your operating may give some kind of relief to the patient, some kind of palliative care to the patient. So only those interventions will be doing.
Okay, let me ask the panelists a case scenario. Let's imagine there's a 56-year-old person with a cardiac condition comes with the superior mesenteric artery thrombosis and entire superior mesenteric territory is infarcted, gangrenous. So what should we do? Let's start from Dr. Vimal. Entire SMA territory is gone.
So you're asking a transplant surgeon.
I know you are, but by training a GI surgeon.
We will do a small intestinal transplant.
Not a problem. So basically, if you're, for example, if you have a serious comorbidity and you have a life-threatening condition, that for which even if you do a surgery, it would going to be it's not fruitful. It won't be able to save the patient, or even if you save the patient, you would be bedridden for all the time. At this, I would not do much. I would rather take anticoagulants rather than operating.
Bhaskar, can I intervene?
Yes, please.
As a vascular surgeon, we meet with this problem frequently.
Yeah.
I can tell you, in Indian settings, if the total territory of SMA has become gangrenous, it is simply incompatible with life. Except in extraordinary situations where you can maintain with parenteral nutrition for a long time, etc. In all other cases, it is simply incompatible with life.
Unless they can be given. Yeah, my policy has been if you open and you find the entire area is gangrenous, just close and come back. I don't know whether it is ethically right or not, but I presume if the patient does not die immediately, will die in about 2 weeks' time. With enormous cost to the patient. Let's ask another panelist.
Bhaskaran, Dr. Banerjee is there in the audience. Dr. Banerjee would like to come and say hello.
JK.
Yes, JK Banerjee. Can you unmute your mic and...
Good evening, Dr. Radha.
Yeah, put your camera on. We want to see you.
Hello.
Hello, JK. Good evening.
Hello. Yeah. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. We can hear you.
I very, very interesting debate going on, and I really appreciating everything regarding this operating on a patient with a involvement whole of the superior mesenteric artery thrombosis area involved. I think it's a question of again it comes ethical. Like if you operate, patient is going to require the TPN for lifelong, which is practically impossible in Indian circumstances. And if you don't operate, patient is going to have a miserable death very quickly. So you can choose, like it depends on, you have to take the family condition, family consent in this and act according to that. There is no clear-cut answer in this.
Okay.
Bhaskaran, can I add a sentence?
Yes.
Answer?
Look, Bhaskaran.
Yeah.
You see, our all actions should be patient-centric instead of protocol-centric. Okay? Our all actions should be patient-centric rather than protocol-centric. That is the difference between the knowledge and wisdom. Wisdom you take time to acquire, and you have to take a decision, as you correctly said, depending upon the situation, local condition, patient supportability, extent of gangrene, all these things you have to take. That is where the experience comes after the knowledge. That is why the experience matters. All our actions should be patient-centric.
Okay.
Pari, you have comments?
I think I would agree with what Dr. Banerjee and Dr. Patnaik were saying. In Indian settings, I think 99% of the times, I think it is improbable. It is improbable that the patient would go on to get a bowel transplant and survive the whole ordeal. So most of the times, I think it's prudent to just leave the patient alone without doing much. But theoretically, if the patient has got enough means, got enough, social support and financial support, theoretically they can go on to become, on home TPN and then go on to get a intestinal transplant. That is possible. It's not that intestinal transplant has not been done in India. It has been done. A couple of intestinal transplants has been done. Theoretically, it is possible, but most of the times, practically, I think what Dr. Bhaskaran said was true. Probably we should just, take. We'll have to accept that it's not really fruitful.
Thank you, Pari. One of the issues we see is inadvertently at surgery, something has happened. Many of us do not inform the patient. So when you have errors during surgery, how many of us actually tell our patients? What would the panelists experience? Dr. Sharma, sir. We can't hear you. Yeah.
Dr. Patnaik will start.
Hello.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
It's very hard to tell because it requires courage, public faith to say that your bowel got injured accidentally by me. And this can only happen when you are in a position to say so. One cannot expect a youngster to come out in crowd and say, I injured this and this organ, because that he will sign his own death warrant same time, though may be ethical.
So how should we deal with that, sir?
We have been taught, and I generally follow, if there is an error, that we record it in the operation notes. And my policy has been to tell, if there is a bile duct injury, if Pari is around or Vimal is around, I ask for their help and I document it and I tell the patient. Same day. And
Sir, the situation is very different. We are talking two scenarios. One scenario, you are in a big corporate hospital or in a teaching hospital, you can rectify it same time and inform the public that you have some particular organ is injured, a duct or a bowel, which has been dealt well. That is a very pleasant way of telling. But when somebody has ruptured the urethra while doing dilatation and he is not able to control the thing, or a bile duct injury, a youngster cannot go out in the public. That will be a suicidal mission. He has to involve some local seniors, because every place bile duct cannot be injured, cannot be repaired.
How should we deal with it, sir? Suppose that youngster.
That youngster should call his local couple of influential seniors in the theater, if they could handle it. And if they cannot handle, then let a senior person talk on behalf of the junior. I have talked several times for my friends in my area.
Then you will converse with the patient's relatives.
Yes, because people accept my word more as a gospel than as a doctor, because people have faith in me. So there should be somebody whom they are willing to listen.
Yeah, the Mishra is saying something.
Hello. Yeah. Dr. Patnaik, how will you deal with this?
In my experience, whenever I have told and admitted the fault, I have been better off than when I have not admitted. With the passage of years, you develop a technique of telling the people about an accident or about a complication. Maybe you take one or two colleagues of yours along with, or you call the senior person from the family or 2-3 people and see that they are not violent. But when you admit your fault, they better accept than when they come to know later on through some sources. Because in operation theatre, you cannot hide anything. We are naked. Everything is visible. Except you, everybody knows what is happening. Because you are focused on the surgery, but everybody knows what you are doing. So it is very difficult to hide. You remember that Gupta's swab leaving inside the abdomen, So many things. So if you want to hide something and the party comes to know afterwards, it is more dangerous than admitting the fault and taking the necessary steps. That has been my experience. And I have individual examples, I can give many, but I have managed to escape or survive by admitting the fault and in a proper way.
Correct. Dr. Mishra.
You have to prepare for it. You have to prepare for it by starting with informed consent. When you tell the patient that this is the surgery going to be done, then you also tell the patient that these are the possible complications. Of course, you cannot list all the complications nor prepare yourself or the patient for all the complications. But like Dr. Sharma has said, that you have to learn and you have to kind of use particular technique for breaking this to the patient. You have to, as a senior person, they will accept it from me. From a very junior person, they may get violent. So, judging on the situation, you will have to inform the relatives, but in a very, very conducive kind of an atmosphere. And sometimes it is better to have a senior person break this news and have kind of have the patients in your confidence. Only then you tell them that this is happening. Of course, for all legal purposes, you will also document it in writing on the records also. So this is a tricky situation. There is no one way of going about it. But like Dr. Patnaik has said, it always pays to be truthful and straight. But how you would go about it practically in a, say, group of people who may not be very understanding, it is a very, very tricky situation for which you need experience and you need to have their confidence.
Dr. Anjali wants to come in here.
Sir, now in this regard, I want to share with you all that when in 2006, I think, when I have recently started with the stapler surgery, sir, in a periphery like manner, that I was operating on almost grade 4 prolapsing piles, and it was quite edematous also. I was using Ethicon J&J stapler, and in the city, nobody still doing PPH. I fired the stapler and accidentally, because of the my assistant has lost the central traction which we give, and there was a giveaway and only half of the donut came, and there was torrential bleeding from all the sides, sir. Only the half donut came out and half of the mucosa which was intact, and the staple could not be fired. Now I managed with the bleeding. I have achieved the hemostasis completely. Patient was under spinal anesthesia. He was a teacher actually, and he had had lot of time to recollect the money which was for the surgery. Now, after finishing the surgery, sir, even though I would not have told him that such and such thing has happened, he could not see anything inside. But after the surgery was finished, to his wife and the patient, we went inside the room, my husband and me. We have told whatever has happened, and on the next day, sir, now I have to manage that stapler. It was not available in the city, sir. I used to keep only 1 or 2 or at the most 3 staplers with me, and that was the last stapler that time. So my another batchmate, she was in Sangli, Miraj, and in the night she sent that stapler in the bus, travel bus, that came in the early morning. On the next day morning, sir, again patient was given spinal anesthesia, and I have fired only the half remaining donut, sir. And that has invented a new technique for the surgery, which I have presented in many conferences. Yeah. So such is the courage, sir, which you require. Initially, I have thought on both the lines, whether I should share, whether I should not. But on the at the end of the discussion, my husband told that even though if you do not tell, it will be always a guilt inside you. And if you tell, there will be some new door will open, and in such thing can happen.
Thank
sir.
you,
So
thank
you
you,
have to
Dr.
be.
Anjali. Thanks for
Thank you.
sharing this.
That's a good idea. Yeah, we'll move on to the next one, which is a very important one. That is, thou shalt not abandon the surgical safety check. The original is below. Anyway, there is a lot of difference between these two, but it is very, very important that we all should follow surgical safety check.
I asked Dr. Bhaskaran why you have omitted the original.
That's for everybody.
This is not a correct translation.
It's not.
Very true, sir.
It is not. Okay, let's ask Mishra ji, what do you think? How often do you practice surgical safety check?
But no, Bhaskaran, but the lower part of it, ask me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mishra.
Surgical safety check is now part of all the corporate cultures, and we have all the protocols fixed now, that you have to do this at the time of sign in, time out, this. All these things are now protocolized, and you have to follow these meticulously. At the time of say when you're closing, all the counts, other things, they have to be now. It is part of the routine kind of which you have to follow, and there is no escape from it. We are doing so many things. Our mind is distracted by so many things. If you don't practice this regularly, then there are bound to be errors, and that is why the safety checklist has been created, and we are all for it, and we go exactly by that.
Professor Amol sir, do you do this routinely?
Yes, I do, and I don't think there is much discussion needed about this because the benefits are so immense, well proven all over the world. So it is in our own best interest that we do this surgical safety check for every procedure.
No, it's not just on paper. It warrants that the surgeon and anesthetist verbalize what they have to do, whether they have the competence to do that, etc., etc. Whether the equipment is okay.
Yes.
Signing the paper. We need to. I am Dr. Bhaskar. I am going to go do a lab cholecystectomy. Problem, etc., etc.
GDS sir, you have your own checklist.
No, besides the checklist, I would like to very humbly say 80% of hospitals in Delhi, they have checklist only on the papers. It is never done in national capital. It is all on paper. Somebody signs at the end. The surgeon signs, the anesthetist signs, is actually not done. Maximum what is done is time out. The other two components are missing. Because
I agree, sir.
People at the end, like a ceremony, they will bring the paper. Once you are in a coffee launch, sir, you forgot to sign this. So this everybody signs. It is primarily, it is not the hospital based. It is how much surgeon is obsessed to do this.
I remember in Delhi sometime in 2009 when BLK started. So we were the first hospital to start. There we used to verbalize totally. I am so and so. This is the plan I am going to do. And well before the patient comes into the theatre, you tell 100 people will ask you, are you Mrs. Rashmi Sharma, whatever name. That don't get annoyed because this is verification. So we used to follow that very regularly. I'm little surprised that you say 80% of the hospitals in Delhi don't follow it.
Bhaskaran, there is a lot of truth in what Dr. GD is saying. Now, even the timeout has become some sort of a ceremonious thing, and the surgeon will just be waiting for the thing. Nobody will be listening to what the sister is saying in a matter of timeout. People will be chit-chatting among themselves.
Okay, let's ask Umesh, what is happening in his college?
Sir, we do practice surgical safety checklist, sir. We do it religiously. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, we can.
We do it religiously, and we have started doing this off late of about 1 year or so, sir. But I do think that this surgical safety checklist is still incomplete, and many things can be added to it. Maybe I'm a junior to all of you, but I do think that many things are still missing in this surgical safety checklist, sir. Like, what about the instrumental count? And the instrument count should be under gauze pieces count, and that all should be made a separate safety checklist and should be checked by the surgeon or the staff nurse along with someone else too, an uninterested third party. I do think, sir, but every time the count is only blindly trusted that the staff nurse would have done it. I don't think that every surgeon does it, and there should be some guidelines regarding this. I would like to.
I'll call Dr. Pradhaban from Calicut to comment on whether what exactly it does in terms of checklist and timeout. Pradhaban?
I don't have the clinical check.
Can you put a camera on,
timeout as we. Okay, sir. Good evening. I don't have the. Our still don't. I'm just. We don't have the classical checklist as we see in corporate sector, because we work in a government sector where there are lacking of staff and other things. Surgeon himself does the checking and the final checklist of these.
The medicine checklist has not come into government medical colleges at the way they should come.
Bhaskaran, I want to come for a minute.
Yes, please.
In your panel, how many are from the corporate and how many from the medical college?
2 are from corporate, I think, and you are in medical college, and one more person is from.
You see, in medical colleges, where a dozen of PG students enter in the operation theatre, safety is also compromised. Number one. Number two, the onus mainly remains on the chief surgeon if an instrument is left or a swab is left or safety check is broken. So the surgeon, the leading surgeon, the lead surgeon is important how strictly he admits those safety checklists. Otherwise, what happens?
What is your practice in your college?
My college, the HOD is instructed to stay, not to leave the OT till the resident closes the abdomen.
Okay.
Usually what happens, the number one surgeon works out, giving to the number two, close kar dena. Number two, after 10 minutes, works out for coffee or band kar dena. Then all the checklist goes for 6 and the complications happen. In a corporate, because you are answerable, your reputation is at stake, and the crowd is less, probably checklist is well implemented. I have seen MAMC, I have seen Lady Hardinge, I have seen ESI. When there is a group of PGs and group of residents and group of consultants, the safety check is only namesake. It is not followed 100%. But the onus remains with the senior most surgeon. So because he is worried, count correct, then only he leaves. If he loses that, then there is trouble.
Let's ask Dr. Mishra, what is the status in GB Pant, where he was till a couple of years ago?
Dr. Patnaik is right on the dot. I think although all efforts are there, but it is not the same way that in corporate sector, the surgeon, he is himself answerable. Over there, the professor has a team of so many assistant professors, residents, MCH fellows who are there. So this is quite diluted. So I really think that what Dr. Patnaik is saying is absolutely on the dot.
Dr. Mishra, it is much better in super specialty. What about general surgery units?
That's what I'll ask you. Anybody, general surgeon alone.
Yes. It is worse in general surgery units.
Oh, yes.
Radha,
yeah.
Can you ask any of the people who is independent practitioner whether he follows anything like surgical safety checklist?
I'll call Kannan to comment if he's there.
Yeah.
Kannan, of course, is a big time GA surgeon, retired professor of director of GA Surgical Services, but he can throw some light on this because he works both in the corporate and government sector. Kannan, are you there?
Okay, let's move on to the next one if Dr. Kannan is not around. Yeah, this is one tricky situation. Thou shalt not steal is a well-established one. When it comes to surgical practice, it is stealing somebody else's labor, especially patients. I mean, I've been in corporate sector now for a few years, and sometimes I've been aghast. I see a patient, send the patient for insurance, and the patient vanishes, and suddenly he or she appears in somebody else's list. So, what is the opinion of various people? I'm sure everybody must have faced this. Dr. Amol, will you start?
Yeah. I don't do it, but I have seen this happening frequently in the corporate hospitals where I work. I'm helpless about that. All that I can say is that I don't do this. But I know that this is very, what shall I say, almost a common practice in many of the corporate hospitals.
So this is one is patient, the other is intellectual work. Somebody has done intellectual work, his boss takes the credit for the paper. So Dr. Mishra, what would you say about this?
See, there is absolutely no debate about it, and I think this ethical kind of thing has to be followed. You know, talking about the paper, you know, there is a lot of conceptualization of a paper, and the contribution of the paper is not only by the person who is writing it, but whose work it is, right? So the allocation of the authorship should be according to what kind of ideas have been contributed by different persons and what amount of work. See, I would say give the authorship to even a person who has done the work of say following up the patients, rang up the patients, got their follow-up. So that person also would be entitled to the authorship, although he may not have contributed that much to the idea, right? So there is this kind of justice kind of a thing has to be done regarding the authorship, regarding and as far as stealing another person's intellectual property, there's no debate about it that it should be governed by. This is not science, but this is conscience. So that has to be followed by in word and spirit.
And Pramod, if I can ask you, if somebody brings a 5-year-old child with inguinal hernia to you and wants you to operate, but there's a pediatric surgeon also in the institute, what will you say?
See, if I am the only surgeon who can operate on that child, only then I'll operate. As now the division of work has been such that we have a pediatric surgeon, and pediatric surgeon would be doing all these children. So, but the problem occurs when it is a little older child, say 12-year-old child. The pediatric surgeon is also going to claim, say suppose he is a choledochal cyst, I am also well equipped to do that. So sometimes there is an issue, but most of the time, say 6 years and below, all should be operated by a pediatric surgeon.
Okay, let's ask other consultants. Okay, Dr. Sharma, what would you say about this?
I think Dr. Mishra's condition is very different, because in corporate, even when one wants to do, they do not permit cross specialty work. The real situation is when I get a pediatric hernia, I have a young pediatric surgeon in the town. Do I pass on to him or not? This should be the right. Yeah. And I have no legal hassles on me to be checked that whether why did I do a hernia. Let me confess, since all my life I have, because when I did the first pediatric hernia in my area, my pediatric surgeon was not born as yet. So I still continue to do pediatric surgery, which is the regular job. I don't hand over to pediatric surgery.
Dr. Sharma sir, issue is, if the patient has been seen by a pediatric surgeon and the patient has come to you, what will you do?
I give him a choice, and most people still vote for me because the old head always gathers more, crowd.
Yes.
I told you, because before he was born, I did the pediatric job.
No, that is fine. Now, in a hospital, you are working in a hospital where there is a pediatric surgeon in your own hospital.
Then automatically it goes to pediatric surgeon.
Okay. Now, Bhaskaran, yeah. You see, in a corporate setting, don't forget that the patients, class of patients who come to you all, they do a lot of window shopping. Suppose you have booked a case of choledochal cyst or a pediatric hernia, the fellow comes to know that there is a established pediatric surgeon in the same hospital. He may find next day in his OPD, and you will think that he has stolen your patient. This cannot happen in a medical college setting, but the kind of patients come to corporate hospital, they will consult 5 people and do window shopping before coming to a surgeon.
No, in corporate hospitals, it's very clearly written.
Yes.
The management gives you authority to operate on certain diseases, certain cases. So
Agreed.
Blanket pediatric will go to pediatric surgery. If I am to operate, I'll have to incorporate the pediatric surgeon.
Okay.
Okay. Now I'll move on to the next one. There is no further major talk on this. So this is a very important one. This follows the original one, which is against the neighbor. So the commandment will be, thou shalt not bear false witness of emergency to perform unnecessary surgery. This is a very common problem in many hospitals, not in corporate hospitals, but in busier hospitals where it is very difficult to get OT slot. So let's take the opinion, Dr. Umesh.
Yes, sir.
How often do your residents or you people try to bring an emergency which is not an emergency so that you are elected?
That's a very common thing.
Sir, this has not been happening in my college at present, sir, due to we have a good backup of OT. So, but this used to be happen in the PG college which I have studied, sir. Many people tend to bring the cases into the emergency and do it unnecessarily. And most of the time, we test the integrity of the residents by asking them whether this is an acute appendicitis, whether it needs to be done in open. Because the next day the lab is done by the assistants.
Yeah. Hello. Hello.
I think that is an interesting point, Bhaskaran, because if the appendix goes to the next day, it will go to the assistant professors, will do lab, so we'll do open surgery tonight.
No, that is one aspect. The other aspect is you tell the patient that you got an appendicitis. If you don't operate immediately, now it will go. So something will happen, it will burst, etc., etc. Let's ask Vimal. Vimal, what do you think of this? If a patient may be forced to undergo an operation for which he is ill prepared, he may not even need.
Let's take the appendicitis as an example. I know senior surgeons like you and Dr. Surendran. I mean, throughout these 5 years, I've seen you not operate appendicitis in the first thing. You just give him antibiotics. I have seen you, and even Dr. Surendran, we don't operate appendicitis.
Bhaskaran may be lazy.
Bhaskar sir is one of the busiest surgeons. Like, he operates like every day. You can see his energy when he operates. He has 3 or 4 cases in the list, and all the time he shuttles to the data. To see him with full of energy will give us a lot of encouragement. So I think if there is an alternative treatment that would give you an equal outcome, I think we should do that, rather than having the pretense of emergency and scaring them with all the complications that can happen.
Like General Patnaik says, it should be patient-centric. General Patnaik sir, what would you say?
In my setting, Bhaskaran, it is the other way around. The consultant manager says conservatively, he says come tomorrow. So that next unit removes the appendix.
Okay.
Okay. In the medical college, where the salary is fixed, there is no incentive to removing an appendix in the middle of the night. They try to avoid it. It is the other way around with me.
No, but
now next day I have to ask the consultant, why didn't you operate in the night?
Okay. Let's ask Dr. Amol. What does he think about this?
Yeah, in Madras Medical College, where I spent long years, this is a very common practice because the particular unit wants to do all its appendix and cholecystitis in the middle of the night so that next day they can concentrate on other things. In the bargain, a vascular ischemia, a vascular trauma will have to wait for several hours. This has happened many times, and I had to go and request the professors not to do this so that not to clog the emergency theater with unnecessary cases. etc. But this happens, and many times we have faced this problem, and I think it's very unfair. Emergency theater must be kept strictly for emergency purposes, so that a trauma can be willed in directly without having to wait for 5 hours, 6 hours, etc.
Dr. Pranab, what is your question? There is Pranab with the raised hand. Can you please unmute and come with your question, Dr. Pranab? Yeah, there's no. Yeah, Umesh, you want to say something?
Yeah, yes, sir. Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah.
I just got offline, sir. Yes, as Amlor sir said, most of the time in MMC, Madras Medical College, we used to take all the emergencies, and as sir correctly told, the vascular emergencies and many emergencies tend to wait. But it's all decision upon the surgeons who are going to see the case. And most of the time, when the next department case, the emergency case, the slot has to be ready, the next unit people tend to ignore, or the PGs has to go to the next unit DAS to take up the case. And that's a difficulty we, as PGs, we used to face, sir, most of the time.
Dr. Sharma sir, will you give your final comment on this before we move to the next one?
I think it is the unit chief which should have rationality to think. I have never pushed a non-emergency case because I'm always overworked. So why do something which can be poorly done tomorrow morning? So I would not push anything which is not real emergency.
So that is number one. Number two is we are also unnecessarily doing an operation when it probably is not needed.
I will repeat the same thing. If you want to grow higher up in life, have more public popularity, one should give a fair opinion. Because by giving, I see it from the other spectrum so often. Somebody is telling appendectomy to be done tonight, gallbladder to be done tonight. When I happen to examine and I said nothing to worry, we can coolly do it. So if you give true scientific picture, the public respectability is more.
Okay, thank you. So let's move on to the next commandment.
The last one.
Yeah, the last one. So thou shalt not covet speed for safety. So this is something which a lot of people are wondering. I remember somebody mentioning in one of these forums that he has seen somebody doing lap chole in 15 minutes, 6 lap choles in one day, and lots of problems. What would our panelists say on this? Dr. Mishra?
There is no doubt about it that safety is the most important thing, and we have to work in the interest of the patient. And just trying to show off, this is not the kind of surgical surgeon that we are looking at. And safety is uppermost.
But if you are sticking to it, your anesthetist won't like you.
No, see, undue delay in surgery just because you're not properly making the decisions, that also can compromise the patient. So, in fact, it should be a adequate kind of competence, and it should not be important that how much time you are taking. Nowadays, the anesthesia is very safe, and your foremost interest is safety of the patient rather than you trying to show off that I can do an appendix in 10 minutes or gallbladder in 10 minutes. So you are bound to increase your complications. So you should do it competently, and time is not important.
Okay, thank you. I think I'll ask Vimal. I'm sure he is the one who's going to give the ultimate word. Safety is
Bhaskaran,
yeah.
Amalur Panathan was in the medical college for many, many years. In medical college, surgeons are very, very fast. They had to be fast.
Yes.
Oh.
Let's ask also. I'll ask Amal after I ask Vimal. Vimal.
When I was in medical college, I worked in medical college. My old chief used to say, laparoscopy is not developing in government hospital. It was like 2001, 2002. It was not developing because lab needs more time and we need a lot of slots and we need to do it fast. And he usually allows the fastest first. So it's like that. It's been like that. We have been seeing things from that, and now for whoever may be the surgeon, whatever may be his experience, the most important thing is safety. Speed comes later, and as you grow, you pick up speed. You know, I knew.
I'll just take 1 minute. Bhaskaran, 1 minute.
Yes, sir.
for the benefit of the panel who have not read it, there is a invited editorial by Barry Jackson. I will request all of you read if you have not read it. What makes an excellent surgeon? Okay, it is a nice write-up, 2-page article. Please tell people to read. At the 19th century, it was the speed. Then it became boldness. Then it became flamboyant technical achievement with flamboyant lifestyle of the surgeons. Now it is the technique, excellence, and communication and demonstration. Very nice article. Let people read. It is in What Makes an Excellent Surgeon by Barry Jackson.
He apparently shows one surgeon who does BK amputation in 20 seconds.
Pardon?
20 seconds BK amputation. He
Yes.
needs assistance to control bleeding.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, Vimal, you're saying something.
Yes, sir. I was saying at any time you should put safety before speed. There are times when you need to be fast, and that is different. Instead of like taking a lot of time to decide what to do for example, if you're not proceeding, that is different. But the first and the foremost thing that comes is the safety of the patient. For example, if you need to go slow in some places, dissecting around the vessels and dissecting around the veins which are adherent to some tumors, you need to go slow in those areas. And
Well, that is how the damage control surgery came.
Okay, so it's almost like driving. There are certain areas where you can probably drive fast, but there are many areas where you need to go very slow. Let's ask Dr. Amol, as a vascular surgeon and as somebody who has worked in government for a very long time.
So my feeling, and this is what I tell my postgraduates, that the first thing is in planning your surgery and having all your instruments in place. Verify yourself. That's the first step. Second step is any complex surgery can be broken into several simple steps. For example, 10 different steps for aneurysm. So I tell them, don't go to step 2 before finishing step 1. Don't go to step 3 before finishing step 2 satisfactorily. So if we go step by step, we reach the end faster. Second thing is, if you go methodically like this, repetitive movements can be avoided. I have found in my experience that most time is taken by repetitive and unsure movements. If we want to avoid repetitive and unsure movements, we must go step by step and stage by stage. By this, the time is automatically shortened, safety is automatically ensured, and post-operative morbidity is also very less. This is my experience.
So I'm sure you tell your residents, out of these step 1, step 3, step 7 are easy, all others are complex or something like this.
No, some might be easy, some might be difficult. In some steps you may have to spend less time, some you may have to spend more time. For example, opening the abdomen, nobody spends a lot of time, whereas dissecting around renal artery, one must be careful and spend a lot of time.
Amal, if I can ask you, you might have also come across some of your students who are extremely slow.
Yeah.
How do you deal with? I've had colleagues like that. In the corporate sector, the cost depends upon the time in the operation theater. One operation which can be done in 2 hours is done in 5 hours. I've seen that. How do you deal with them?
That is very difficult. You will have to tell them repeatedly that they will have to perfect their own technique. There are no shortcuts. No. Supposing somebody is going to spend 1 hour opening the abdomen alone, even after 2-3 years into surgery, what do you do with that person? I don't have any answer for that.
I think many of your vascular surgery and all, they can be tried in dry lab, wet lab before they come on to human beings. That is one.
Yes. Yes.
Faster.
Yes.
Okay. Radha, I think we are going to finish off nearly 2 hours, and I would like a final comment on this from Sir Sharma.
I think I agree with the panelists. Everything has been covered so nice. Thank you so much for such a wonderful session.
Thank you. So I'll just briefly run through all for people to see.
Yeah.
Yes, Radha. If there are any questions from the audience.
Dr. Bhaskaran?
Yes, please. Yes, Dr. Mishra.
You asked me to think about other commandments as well, right?
Yeah.
You have kind of put your commandments exactly styled according to the original commandments. But I thought of few other commandments that need to be included. Can I just have a minute to?
Yes.
Sure.
See, I would put the first commandment as, which has been mentioned also during the discussion, that treat the patient as you want to be treated if you were in his or her place. So I think that this should be the first commandment that all surgeons should follow. Then another commandment that I would like.
Audio can improve. Audio can't hear.
Dr. Patnaik, is it better?
Yeah, I think it is better. You be near close to the mic.
Okay. So I said that I would put first commandment as that treat the patient as you want to be treated if you were in his or her place. So I would put this as a first commandment, and this is what Dr. Nandi also told us, and we have been also discussing that this should be the first commandment for the surgeon. Second commandment that I would also include is that never speak ill of your colleagues. If a patient comes to you referred from somebody else, or a patient has left that doctor and has come to you, you should never speak ill of the treatment given by that doctor, and you should consciously avoid speaking anything, even if he has done something wrong, what you would not agree with, you should not put it in so many words. You should not comment about the treatment that is based on his experience, his thought process, his own conditions. So you should never speak ill of your professional colleagues. Then also, I would also put in here that you should never seek patients. I mean, by this I mean that you should not advertise yourself. You should not send what you have been doing to all the groups, especially to those non-professional groups, that you are capable of doing this or that. You should not give bribes or cuts to seek patients for yourself. Patients should seek you by your honest reputation and by your competence. So this is something that I put now. This has become a corporate culture, and there has been corporate poaching. A saleable doctor is poached by another corporate, and there's advertisement and pharma industry. They are kind of into some kind of technique so that they would kind of pursue and advertise these doctors. So this should be avoided. Then I have also put in that informed consent. Informed consent gives the patient an autonomy of choice, and this should be one of the commandments, and you should tell them accurately that there is, say, 3 to 5% mortality in my hands, there is 40% incidence. Say, suppose you are doing a Whipple's operation, you should tell them that 10 to 15% is the leak rate, and these are the problems that you need to face. So that prepares the patient also in the post-operative stage. And another commandment that I would like to add over here is that you must follow your patient and keep your records and keep records of your if you don't follow your patient, you would not really know what you have been doing. So keeping the record of the patients and following them up is a very important commandment that I would like to be included over here. Dr. Bhaskaran, you have nicely put in. It has already been discussed. I thought that these additional points can be made. So that's all.
Thank you.
Is it Dr. Chaube sir there?
I had
Dr. Rajan Chaube?
No.
Oh, okay. And I heard his voice.
Anyway,
Okay.
I think I really enjoyed conducting this panel discussion. Our panelists have been exceedingly nice, and they gave very thoughtful insights to many of these things. Many of them came from their experience, and I really appreciate their time and their contribution to this panel discussion. Thank you, Radha.
Thank you very much, Professor Bhaskaran.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Nice seeing you. We shall meet soon once again. Thank you.
Thank you
all so
very much, Radha. Thank you.
Thank you.